Alan Wright wiped sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on the cooling unit. The lights in this section of Horizon 9 station flickered again. That was the third time today. Something was wrong with the power grid. But the Voxari. Engineers kept insisting their systems were perfect. Alan knew better. Done yet, human? The voice came from behind him. The strange double tone of Voxari speech still odd to his ears even after 8 months on the station. Alan turned to see Chief Engineer Zexistrin, his forearms crossed in what Alan had learned was a gesture of impatience. The alien's compound eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting in thousands of tiny fragments. Just finished, Alan said. But the power fluctuations are getting worse. We need to check the main grid connectors where the human and Voxari systems integrate. Zextrin made a clicking sound with his mandibles. Your human technology is the problem. Our systems have functioned perfectly for 300 cycles. Alan bit back a sharp response. The Voxari were brilliant engineers, but their pride made cooperation nearly impossible. This station was supposed to be a symbol of partnership between their species, but most days it felt like they were barely tolerating each other. I'll add it to my report, Alan said instead. As the only human engineer among the maintenance crew, he was used to being ignored. The diplomats and scientists got all the attention while people like him kept everything running. The station shook suddenly, throwing Alan against the wall. Alarm klaxons began to wail. What was that? He gasped, regaining his balance. Zexitrin was already moving toward the door, his normally blue skin paling to a sickly white. Attack! The defense screens are activating. Alan followed him into the corridor where emergency lights pulsed red. Station personnel, both human and Voxari, rushed in all directions. Through a viewport, Alan caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A massive ship with the distinctive blade-like shape of a crawl battlecruiser. The station rocked again as another impact hit. This time, the lights went completely out before the emergency systems kicked in. All personnel to evacuation points. The announcement came in both English and the clicking Voxari language. This is not a drill. Horizon 9 has sustained critical damage. All personnel to evacuation points immediately. Alan turned to run toward the nearest human evacuation pod, but a thunderous crash shook the station more violently than before. A support beam broke loose above him. He looked up just in time to see it falling before everything went black. Pain was his first sensation when consciousness returned. His head throbbed, and something warm and wet trickled down his face. Blood. Alan tried to move and found his left leg pinned under debris. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. The corridor was empty now, filled only with smoke and the occasional spark from damaged systems. Hello? Alan called, his voice sounding strange in the silence. Anyone there? I need help. No response came. With effort, he managed to shift the debris from his leg enough to pull free. Standing made him dizzy, but he forced himself to stay upright, leaning against the wall for support. This is Engineer Wright, he said into his comm unit. I'm in Section C7, need assistance. Only static answered him. He limped toward the nearest terminal and tried to access the station's systems. Most functions were offline, but he managed to get a limited status report. What he saw made his stomach sink. Life support was running on emergency power. Hull breaches had been detected in multiple sections, and most worrying of all, the station's internal sensors showed only one life. Sign his own, that can't be right, Alan muttered, tapping commands to run a diagnostic. But the report came back the same. Either everyone else was in areas where the sensors were completely dead or they were gone. He limped to the nearest viewport and looked out. The crawl ship was no longer visible. Instead, he saw the receding lights of evacuation craft, both the sleek Voxari shuttles and the bulkier human pods, moving away from the damaged station. They had evacuated. All of them. Without him. Alan checked the communication systems next. The human long-range transmitter had been destroyed in the attack. The Voxari quantum communicator was intact but non-functional. It required Voxari operators with specialized neural implants. He was alone on a dying station with no way to call for help. The reality of his situation hit him like a physical blow. He slumped against the console, fighting against rising panic. The life support systems were damaged. According to the readings, oxygen levels were already dropping in some sections. He had perhaps 3 days before the station became unlivable. "They left me," he whispered. "They all just left me here to die." The unfairness of it burned in his chest. Had they even looked for him? Or had they just counted heads, seen one missing, and decided the risk of waiting was too great? Alan's hands curled into fists. No. He wouldn't die here, forgotten and abandoned. He was an engineer. Solving problems was what he did. He forced himself to think logically. First, he needed to assess exactly what was still working. Then he needed to find food, water, and make sure he had air to breathe. After that, he would find a way to signal for help. With new determination, Alan pulled himself up and began limping toward the maintenance hub. If any part of the station would have the tools he needed, it would be there. Hours later, Alan had a better understanding of his situation. The attack had been precise, targeting communications, weapons, and the main power core. But the station itself was largely intact. The Crawl hadn't wanted to destroy it, just disable it. In the food storage area, he found enough emergency rations to last one person several months. Water recycling was still functional in 2 of the station's 6 sections, and by sealing off damaged areas, he could preserve the atmosphere in the parts of the station he needed. He could survive, for a while at least. As he sat in the dim light of what had once been the bustling control center, eating a tasteless emergency ration bar, Alan's eyes fell on a damaged Voxari console. Its crystal interface was cracked, but the underlying systems might still be salvageable. A thought began to form in his mind. The station had always been a patchwork of human and Voxari technology, never truly integrated, always working against each other as much as together. That was why there were constant problems he had spent months fixing. He knew these systems better than anyone, both the human technology and the alien designs. What if instead of just surviving until rescue, he did something more? What if he rebuilt the station? Not as it had been, a clumsy hybrid of 2 incompatible technologies, but as something new, something better. Alan stood up, wincing at the pain in his injured leg. Around him, the abandoned station creaked and groaned as damaged systems strained to function. "They left me here to die," he said to the empty room. "But I'm not going to die." He picked up a toolkit and limped toward the first system that needed repair, a new sense of purpose filling him. "I'm going to make this place stronger than it ever was." 7 days had passed since the attack. Alan Wright sat cross-legged on the floor of what had once been the Voxari engineering bay, surrounded by disassembled pieces of technology. His injured leg was wrapped in a makeshift brace, and his beard had begun to grow and patchy and uneven. A half-eaten ration bar lay forgotten beside him as he focused on the task at hand. "Come on, you alien piece of junk," he muttered, carefully connecting 2 components that were never designed to work together. "Just talk to each other." The device, a hybrid of a human power cell and a Voxari atmospheric processor, sparked slightly, then began to hum. A small green light flickered on, steady and bright. Alan let out a whoop of triumph that echoed in the empty station. He had just bought himself more time. The jury-rigged device would help clean the air in his section of the station, reducing the strain on the failing life support systems. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. The first week had been all about survival. Alan had sealed off the damaged sections of the station to preserve air and heat. He had gathered all the emergency supplies he could find and set up a living space in the most stable area. And he had begun the painstaking work of understanding the station's systems well enough to keep them running. The biggest challenge was the Voxari technology. It operated on principles that human science was only beginning to grasp. But Alan had something most human engineers didn't: months of hands-on experience with the actual systems and access to the station's technical database, or what remained of it after the attack. He limped over to a terminal and pulled up the schematics he'd been studying. His engineer's tablet was connected to it, downloading what information it could. The Voxari had never been forthcoming with the details of their technology, but now, with no one to stop him, Alan was learning their secrets. "It's all about the crystalline matrices," he said to himself, a habit he'd developed to break the crushing silence of the station. "They don't use circuits like we do, it's more like grown technology." A noise from the corridor outside made him freeze. After a week alone, any unexpected sound was cause for alarm. Alan grabbed a metal pipe he kept nearby and moved cautiously toward the door. In the dim emergency lighting, he saw something move, a small spider-like robot, one of the Voxari maintenance drones. It was damaged, moving erratically, its lights blinking in distress patterns. Alan lowered his makeshift weapon. The drone wasn't a threat. In fact, it might be useful. He approached it slowly, making soft clicking sounds that he'd heard the Voxari use when working with their machines. The drone's movements became less frantic. It seemed to be responding to him. "Hey there, little guy," Alan said softly. "You're all alone too, huh? Let's see if we can fix you up." He coaxed the drone back to his workspace and carefully examined it. Most of its systems were intact, but its control unit was damaged. If he could repair it, he might have help with the enormous task of keeping the station functioning. Hours later, after delicate work with tools that felt too big for the job, Alan had the drone operational again. He had needed to replace its Voxari control unit with a modified human interface, which meant the drone no longer responded to the Voxari command language. Instead, he programmed it to accept simple English commands. "Scan area," he told it. The drone lifted off from the workbench. Its lights now a steady blue instead of the original purple. It moved around the room, sensors gathering data, then returned to Alan and projected a holographic display showing the status of various systems in the area. Alan smiled for the first time in days. "Good job, buddy. I think I'll call you Scout." With Scout's help, Alan was able to explore parts of the station that had been too dangerous to enter alone. The drone could fit through damaged areas and report back, giving Alan a much better understanding of the station's condition. What he found was both better and worse than he had feared. The station's core structure was sound, which meant he wasn't in immediate danger of explosive decompression. But the main reactor was in worse shape than his initial readings had suggested. He had perhaps a month before it failed completely. 2 weeks after the attack, Alan made a crucial discovery. Scout had been scanning a section of the station that Alan had never entered before, a restricted Voxari research area. The drone returned with images of a laboratory filled with equipment that even Alan didn't recognize. Most importantly, the lab contained canisters of what appeared to be microscopic machines. "Repair nanites," Alan whispered, eyes wide as he studied Scout's findings. The Voxari had mentioned such technology but had always kept it as one of their most closely guarded secrets. The nanites could rebuild damaged systems according to pre-programmed schematics. It took Alan 3 days to safely reach the lab. Parts of the route were exposed to vacuum, requiring him to use one of the emergency spacesuits he'd found. But the prize was worth the risk. The nanite canisters were intact, protected by their own power sources. However, when Alan tried to activate them, he hit a wall. The nanites required Voxari command codes and schematics to function. Of course it couldn't be easy, Alan said, slumping in frustration. He had the tools that could save the station, but he couldn't make them work. Then, an idea struck him. The nanites were just machines, incredibly small ones, but still machines. And machines could be reprogrammed. Alan connected his tablet to the nanite control system and began the painstaking process of understanding their programming. It was like trying to read a language that used an alphabet he'd never seen before. But bit by bit, he began to make sense of it. The breakthrough came when he realized the nanites didn't need complete schematics to work. They could adapt based on their surroundings, using existing structures as templates. If he could just get them to accept his commands instead of requiring Voxari authorization, he might be able to direct their repair efforts. After days of trial and error, subsisting on ration bars and too little sleep, Alan finally succeeded. A test batch of nanites responded to his commands, rebuilding a small section of damaged panel exactly as he instructed. Alan laughed out loud, the sound echoing strangely in the quiet lab. With the nanites and Scout, he had a real chance not just of surviving but of actually repairing the station. As he watched the microscopic machines at work, Alan's mind raced with possibilities. The station had never worked properly, even before the attack. It had been a patchwork of incompatible technologies, human and Voxari systems forced to work together without true integration. But Alan understood both systems now better than perhaps anyone else in the galaxy. And with the nanites, he had the means to rebuild the station not as it had been, but as it should have been. "They thought I would die here," he said to Scout, who hovered nearby. "But I'm going to do more than survive. I'm going to make this place better than anyone thought possible." The drone blinked its lights in what Alan chose to interpret as agreement. For the first time since waking up alone on the damaged station, Alan felt something more than just determination to survive. He felt hope. 6 months had passed since the attack on Horizon 9. The station was no longer the same place where Alan Wright had been abandoned. Alan stood in what had once been the central control room, now transformed by his work. The walls gleamed with a soft blue light from the integrated systems he had created. Screens displayed data in both human and Voxari formats, but with a new interface of his design that made both equally accessible. "Scout, run a diagnostic on Section D7, Alan said to the drone hovering nearby. Scout was no longer alone. Alan had repaired and reprogrammed 5 more maintenance drones, each specialized for different tasks. Together, they formed his workforce, extending his reach throughout the station. Scout's display lit up with the results. Power flow was stable, atmosphere optimal. Another section successfully rebuilt. Alan stroked his now full beard, which he had finally trimmed into something presentable. He was thinner than before, but stronger too. His body adapted to the constant physical work of rebuilding. "We're making good progress," he said to his mechanical companions. Talking to the drones had kept him sane during the long months of isolation. Sometimes he imagined they understood him beyond their programming, especially Scout, whose responses seemed almost thoughtful at times. The first 3 months had been the hardest. Working with the nanites had been frustrating and dangerous. Twice he had nearly lost control of them when they tried to revert to their original Voxari programming. But Alan had persisted, refining his commands, studying the alien code until he could manipulate it as well as any Voxari engineer. Now the nanites were his most valuable tool. They worked constantly, repairing damage, strengthening structures, and most importantly, implementing Alan's new designs. The station's power core had been his first major project. The original design had been inefficient. The human and Voxari systems working against each other as much as together. Alan had completely rebuilt it, creating a true hybrid that drew on the strengths of both technologies. Where humans had focused on reliability and adaptability, the Voxari had prioritized efficiency and elegance. Alan's design incorporated both philosophies. The result was a power core that produced 30% more energy while using fewer resources. "Time to check the fabrication bay," Alan said, leaving the control room. The corridors were clean and, well lit now, no longer the dim, damaged passages of the early days. Some sections still showed scars from the attack, but those areas were sealed off, waiting for Alan to get to them in his systematic rebuilding of the station. The fabrication bay had been a game-changer for Alan. Getting it operational again had taken 2 months of intensive work, but now he could create new components rather than just salvaging old ones. With the fabricator, his tablet full of designs, and the nanites to implement them, there were few limits to what he could build. When Alan entered the bay, he found the latest project nearly complete. A new type of sensor array, smaller and more sensitive than either human or Voxari designs, was being assembled by a swarm of nanites. Alan checked the progress on his tablet, making a small adjustment to the software that would run the array. This would be the final piece needed to enhance the station's long-range scanners, perhaps enough to finally detect passing ships and signal for rescue. Not that rescue felt as urgent as it once had, Alan had food, clean water, and a functioning life support system. He was in no immediate danger, and the work of rebuilding the station had become more than just a survival strategy. It had become his purpose. As he worked, Alan's thoughts drifted to why the station had been attacked in the first place. The Crawl were aggressive, but they rarely attacked without provocation. Something about Horizon 9 must have threatened them. While exploring the restricted sections of the station, Alan had found fragments of data that pointed to a disturbing possibility. The Voxari had been conducting weapons research on the station. Research that violated their treaties with both humans and the Crawl. A terminal in the lab had contained partial records of experiments with quantum technology that could, in theory, destabilize the faster-than-light drives used by Crawl ships. It wasn't definitive proof, but it offered a likely explanation for the attack. They were using us as cover, Alan said bitterly, setting down his tools. The humans on this station were just shields for their secret research. It explained why the evacuation had been so rushed, why no one had bothered to look too hard for a missing engineer. The Voxari had needed to hide what they were doing, and the human authorities would have been eager to avoid a diplomatic incident. This knowledge had initially filled Alan with anger, but over time, that anger had transformed into determination. He would rebuild the station not as a place of secrets and lies, but as something new and better. In the station's database, Alan had discovered something the Voxari had kept from their human partners, the potential of their quantum computers. They were powerful but rigid, designed to follow strict Voxari methodologies. Human software, on the other hand, was flexible and adaptive, but less efficient. By creating interfaces between them, Alan had developed hybrid systems more powerful than either species had achieved alone. His new station-wide operating system combined Voxari processing power with human adaptability, managing everything from life support to the nanite swarms. "What would you call it?" Alan asked Scout as they left the fabrication bay, heading toward the improved hydroponics section where he had started growing fresh food to supplement his dwindling ration supplies. The drone couldn't answer, of course, but Alan had fallen into the habit of asking it questions. It helped him think. Not Horizon 9 anymore. That place is gone. Alan considered the options as they walked. Nexus, a connection point, where things come together. Scout's lights blinked in what Alan chose to interpret as approval. The hydroponics bay was lush with growth, another success. Alan had combined human farming techniques with Voxari plant acceleration technology, creating a system that produced food far more efficiently than either could alone. As he checked the plants, a soft alarm sounded from his tablet. The new sensor array was online and had detected something. Alan hurried back to the control room, Scout zooming ahead of him. On the main screen, a reading flickered, an object moving at the edge of the station's detection range. A ship. Hope surged in Alan's chest before caution tempered it. He adjusted the sensors, trying to get a better reading. It was definitely a ship, but not one following any regular trade or patrol route. Its trajectory would bring it near the station in about 3 days. "We need to get the communication array working," Alan told Scout. "We have 3 days to finish it." He had been working on rebuilding the long-range communicator for weeks, but it wasn't yet operational. Now he had a deadline. For the next 72 hours, Alan barely slept. He directed the nanite swarms to focus all their efforts on the communication array. Components were fabricated and installed in record time. Software was written, tested, and rewritten. By the time the ship was within clear scanning range, Alan had the array ready. It wasn't perfect. The range was limited and the signal wasn't as strong as he would have liked, but it would work. As the final connections were made, Alan allowed himself a moment of reflection. After 6 months alone, he was about to contact another living being. The thought was both thrilling and somehow intimidating. He had grown used to his solitude, to being the master of his domain, but he was still human, and humans weren't meant to be alone. Alan took a deep breath and activated the communication array. "This is Engineer Alan Wright of Nexus Station, formerly Horizon 9, requesting assistance. I repeat, this is Engineer Alan Wright requesting assistance. He waited, hoping the signal would reach the approaching ship, hoping they would hear him, hoping they would respond. The future of Nexus and its sole inhabitant hung in the balance. For 3 hours, Alan sent his message into space, repeating it on all frequencies. No response came. He watched the ship on his sensors, tracking its path. It would pass within communication range of the station, but showed no signs of changing course or even noticing Nexus. They're not receiving us, Alan told Scout, who hovered nearby. The signal's not strong enough. Alan ran his hands through his hair, thinking fast. He needed to boost the power to the communication array. That meant diverting energy from other systems. Scout, prepare to shut down all non-essential functions in sections B through F. Redirect power to communications. The drone blinked acknowledgement and darted away to carry out the instructions. Alan turned back to his console, fingers flying over the controls as he reconfigured the power distribution. Lights dimmed throughout large portions of the station. As energy was channeled to the communication array, the signal strength doubled, then tripled. Alan sent his message again. This is Engineer Alan Wright of Nexus Station. I am the sole survivor of Horizon 9. Please respond. For long minutes, there was nothing. Then, crackling through static, a voice. The first human voice Alan had heard in 6 months besides his own. This is Captain Olivia Daniels of the research vessel Stargazer. We're receiving you, Nexus Station. Did you say Horizon 9? That station was reported destroyed. Alan laughed, a sudden sound of relief and joy that echoed in the control room. Not destroyed, Captain. Just abandoned. I was left behind during the evacuation. I've been rebuilding it. There was a pause before the response came. Stand by, Engineer. Right, we're adjusting course to approach your position. ETA 22 hours. The connection ended. Alan leaned back in his chair, a whirlwind of emotions rushing through him. After months of solitude, other humans were coming. They would see what he had accomplished. They would take him home. But a strange feeling settled in his stomach. Nexus had become more than a shelter. It was his creation, his life's work. The thought of leaving it behind felt wrong somehow. Alan pushed these thoughts aside. He had work to do before the Stargazer arrived. If he was going to show them what he had built, he wanted it to be at its best. Scout. Restore power to all sections, then gather the other drones. We need to prepare for visitors. The next 22 hours were a flurry of activity. Alan directed the nanites to finish repairs in the docking bay and the main corridors that the visitors would likely use. He prepared demonstrations of his most impressive achievements, the hybrid power core, the integrated computer systems, and most significantly, his improved version of the Voxari nanite technology. As the Stargazer approached, Alan watched on the external cameras. It was a sleek vessel with the distinctive blue markings of a scientific research ship. Not a military rescue or a Voxari return. This was unexpected. The ship was smaller than he had anticipated, with a crew of perhaps 15 people at most. The vessel docked with surprising ease, which told Alan they were familiar with the basic design of stations like Horizon 9. As the airlock cycled, he straightened his worn uniform and tried to smooth his beard. It had been a long time since he had cared about his appearance. When the inner door opened, 3 people entered the station. The woman in front wore a captain's insignia, Olivia Daniels, Alan presumed. Behind her were 2 men, one wearing the markings of a science officer, the other armed with a standard-issue sidearm, security. Captain Daniels stopped short when she saw Alan, her eyes widening slightly. Alan realized how he must look to them, thin, bearded, dressed in a patched uniform, standing in a corridor lit by softly glowing panels that were neither standard human nor Voxari design. "Engineer Wright?" the captain asked. Alan nodded. "Welcome to Nexus, Captain Daniels." The science officer was looking around in open amazement. This isn't standard configuration for a Horizon-class station. These systems..." He pulled out a scanner and began taking readings. "I made some improvements," Alan said simply. Captain Daniels studied him with sharp eyes. You were left behind during the attack? That was over 6 months ago. How did you survive? It's a long story, Alan replied. Perhaps you'd like to see the control room. It would be easier to explain there. As they walked, Scout and 2 other drones followed at a respectful distance. The security officer kept glancing back at them nervously. Your drones look Voxari, but they're not behaving like any I've seen, Captain Daniels observed. I reprogrammed them, Alan explained. They helped me maintain the station. The science officer, who had introduced himself as Paul Carter, couldn't contain his curiosity. These power conduits, they're neither human nor Voxari design. And these materials, I've never seen this alloy before. Alan smiled slightly. Like I said, I made improvements. When they reached the control room, all 3 visitors stopped in the doorway, stunned by what they saw. The harmonious blend of human and alien technology, the elegant interfaces, the holographic displays showing the station's systems working at peak efficiency, it was unlike anything in either human or Voxari space. This is impossible, Paulie whispered. The integration of these systems, it would take a team of our best engineers years to accomplish this. I had time, Alan said, and motivation. Captain Daniels turned to him, her expression serious. Engineer Wright, I need to understand exactly what happened here. Our records show Horizon 9 was attacked by a crawl vessel and evacuated. All personnel were accounted for. All except me, Alan corrected her. I was knocked unconscious during the attack. When I woke up, everyone was gone. The sensors must have misread my life signs, or... He hesitated. Or they left in such a hurry they didn't bother to look too hard. Why would the crawl attack a joint research station? The security officer asked. Alan moved to a console and brought up the files he had discovered. Because it wasn't just a research station. The Voxari were developing weapons technology here, specifically designed to target crawl ships. They were using the joint mission as cover. Captain Daniels frowned as she examined the data. This would violate at least 3 interspecies treaties. Yes, Alan agreed, which explains why no one came back. The Voxari couldn't admit what they were doing, and our government would want to avoid a diplomatic incident. Paul was still scanning everything in sight, his expression growing more amazed by the minute. But how did you create all this? These systems are beyond anything we have. Alan gestured to a nearby workstation where a swarm of nanites was repairing a damaged panel. I had help. The Voxari left behind their repair nanites. I reprogrammed them. You reprogrammed Voxari nanites? Paul's voice rose in disbelief. That's supposed to be impossible. Their programming is quantum locked. I had nothing but time, Alan said again, and I'm good at what I do. Captain Daniels was watching him with an evaluating gaze. Engineer Wright, do you realize what you've accomplished here? The technologies you've developed, especially this integration of human and Voxari systems, it's revolutionary. Alan hadn't thought of it that way. He had been focused on survival, then on making the station function better. But looking around at his creation through their eyes, he began to understand the significance of what he had built. The fusion system you've created, Paul said, reading from his scanner. It's at least 30% more efficient than our best models, and these computational matrices, they process information faster than anything I've ever seen. We need to report this, Captain Daniels said, both to our authorities and to the Voxari. They'll want to send teams immediately. The thought of his solitary domain suddenly filled with officials and researchers made Alan uneasy. Captain, before you make any reports, there's something else I need to show you. Something I found in the deepest part of the Voxari research section. He led them toward the heart of his creation, where his greatest discovery waited. The future of Nexus, and perhaps of human and Voxari relations, was about to change forever. Alan led Captain Daniels and her crew through corridors that seemed to pulse with life. The walls glowed with soft blue light, and hidden systems hummed with quiet efficiency. Scout and the other drones moved ahead, clearing their path and opening doors. This section was completely destroyed in the attack, Alan explained as they walked. I rebuilt it from scratch. Paul Carter was recording everything on his scanner. his eyes wide with wonder. The molecular structure of these walls, it's like nothing I've ever seen. Stronger than standard hull material, but lighter. Nanite-enhanced composite, Alan said. I found that by instructing the nanites to combine Voxari crystalline matrices with human carbon polymers, I could create materials with better properties than either. They reached a sealed door at the end of a corridor. Alan placed his hand on a panel beside it, and the door slid open to reveal a large, circular chamber. In the center floated what looked like a miniature sun, a swirling ball of energy contained within a translucent field. This, Alan said with quiet pride, is what I call the core. It's a stable fusion reactor, but unlike any existing model. Captain Daniels stepped forward, her face bathed in the golden light of the core. How is this possible? Miniaturized fusion has been theoretical at best. The Voxari were closer than we thought, Alan explained. They had the containment technology but couldn't solve the initiation problem. Human fusion research had solved initiation but struggled with containment. I combined the approaches. Paul was scanning frantically, his device beeping as it processed the readings. This output, it's incredible. A reactor this size could power a city, and the radiation levels are negligible. It's clean, Alan confirmed, and stable. Once initiated, it self-sustains with minimal fuel input. I've had it running for 2 months without issues. Captain Daniels turned to face him, her expression serious. Do you understand what you've created? This technology could transform energy production throughout human space. It could end resource wars, power colonies on worlds we can't currently settle. Alan nodded. He had come to that realization gradually over the weeks as he perfected the core. I know. That's why I wanted to show you before you reported back to your authorities. Why? The security officer asked, speaking up for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. Because once this becomes known, everyone will want it, Alan said. The corporations, the military, the Voxari, they'll all claim ownership. They'll take Nexus apart to get at its secrets. And you don't want that to happen, Captain Daniels said, understanding in her eyes. Alan looked around at his creation, at the station he had rebuilt from ruins, at the drones he had reprogrammed to help him, at the core, pulsing with clean energy. I was left to die here. No one came looking for me. No one cared what happened to one engineer. But in that abandonment, I found freedom to create something new. He faced the captain directly. I don't want Nexus stripped for parts or its technology used for weapons. What I've built here could help both our species, but only if it's shared openly. Captain Daniels considered his words. What exactly are you proposing, Engineer Wright? Want Nexus declared an independent research station, Alan said, open to scientists from all species but controlled by neither humans nor Voxari. A place where technology is developed for the benefit of all. Paul laughed nervously. That's ambitious. The corporations won't like it. Neither will the military or the Voxari High Command. No, Alan agreed. They won't. But they might accept it if the alternative is getting nothing at all. He gestured to Scout, who projected a holographic display showing the chamber they stood in. Then the image zoomed out to reveal that the core chamber was surrounded by a complex web of systems. The core is integrated with Nexus in ways that would be nearly impossible to untangle, Alan explained. And I've built in safeguards. If anyone attempts to remove the core or take control of the station against my protocols, the nanites are programmed to dismantle the key components. Captain Daniels raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a threat, Engineer Wright. Not a threat, Alan said calmly. Insurance. I've had 6 months to think about this, Captain. About what would happen when I was finally found. About what my work here could mean. I don't want personal gain or recognition. I want Nexus to fulfill its potential as a place where humans and Voxari and even Krull can work together, as they should have from the beginning. There was a long silence as Captain Daniels studied him. Then she nodded slowly. I understand. And for what it's worth, I agree with you. This technology is too important to be controlled by any one group. She looked at the core again. But, I can't make that decision. I'll have to report to my superiors. Of course, Alan said. But when you do, make sure they understand what's at stake. Make sure they know that Nexus isn't just a station. It's a new beginning. 3 weeks later, Alan stood in the same control room where he had spent so many solitary hours. But now he was not alone. Representatives from the human government, the Voxari High Command, and even a cautious envoy from the Krull hegemony were gathered to witness the signing of the Nexus Accord. It hadn't been easy. When Captain Daniels reported her discovery, it had set off a firestorm of diplomatic activity. Everyone wanted control of Nexus and its revolutionary technology. But Alan had stood firm, supported unexpectedly by Captain Daniels, who had testified forcefully about the importance of keeping Nexus independent. What had finally convinced the various powers was a demonstration of the Corps' capabilities and a sobering reminder of what had led to the attack in the first place. The Voxari weapons research had nearly started a war. Nexus offered a different path. The human ambassador approached Alan after the signing ceremony. Engineer Wright, I've been authorized to offer you a position at our most advanced research facility. Full directorship, any budget you require. Alan smiled but shook his head. Thank you, Ambassador, but my place is here. Nexus still has so much potential to fulfill. Later, as the delegations prepared to depart, Captain Daniels found Alan in his favorite spot, a viewport overlooking the stars. So, Director Wright, she said with a smile, using his new official title. What's next for Nexus? Alan watched as Scout hovered nearby, its lights blinking contentedly. We expand. There are 10 new research teams arriving next month. We have discussions planned with the Krull about their propulsion technology, and I have ideas for improving the core even further. You could have asked for anything, you know, Daniel said. Wealth, fame, power. Instead, you asked for more work. Alan smiled. Not work, Captain. Purpose. They left me here to die, but instead I found something worth living for, something bigger than myself. As they looked out at the stars, the lights of Nexus reflected in the viewport, blue and gold and shimmering with possibility. What had begun as one man's struggle to survive had become a beacon of cooperation and innovation. The station that had been broken was now stronger than ever, and so was the engineer who had rebuilt it. Outside, the unique silhouette of Nexus was visible against the starfield, part human, part Voxari, part entirely new. Additional modules extended from the original structure, and lights glowed warmly from areas that had once been dark and damaged. It was no longer the place where Alan Wright had been abandoned. It was the place where he had found his destiny. And as ships from 3 different species docked peacefully at its ports, Nexus fulfilled its name, becoming a true connection point for the future of all.